Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started as the last couple of people are joining us here. Thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar. If you're unfamiliar with the Zoom controls, then I'm happy for you because the rest of us know exactly where everything is in all those different softwares, but there they are on the front screen there. So today's webinar is being recorded. Thank you, Monica, for turning that on. Today our webinar is I Had No Idea Assessments Could Actually Be Joyful. So we're all smiling and happy to either be convinced or help convince others of that. I'm Aida Awad, I'm past president of NAGT, joined today by my colleagues Ed Roback from AGI, Missy Holzer from Nesta, and spinning the dials behind the scenes there for us, Monica Bruckner. Thanks for joining us today, Monica. Appreciate your support. So we have a fantastic presenter today. I'm going to turn you over to Jill Wertheim from Scale, Science at West Ed, in just a couple of minutes. After her presentation today, we will have the link up for the evaluation survey. We really appreciate you hanging around till the very end and grabbing that. And also there will be some discussion and Q&A towards the end today. A couple of quick announcements. This will be our last webinar for this webinar series. We'll be coming back to you in September with our start of our 22-23 webinar series. So look for an announcement of that to come from me in August. And over the summer, if you're looking for some great things to catch up on, just a few extra minutes, you might want to drop into our YouTube channel, which is the American Geosciences Institute YouTube channel. There's a full playlist there with every single webinar we've done in our full 7 years of this series. So we encourage you to drop in there and pick up some great information from those previous webinars. Please, throughout the webinar today, use the chat box as an actual chat box. It's not just a question and answer box. It really is a discussion and chat box. So when something is mentioned or something that resonates with you, drop your ideas, drop your thoughts, and drop your questions into that chat box. We'll keep track of those. And if it's something that needs an immediate answer, we'll probably cut in there, Jill, if that's okay with you. Otherwise, we'll hold those questions till the end. But please drop those ideas and thoughts into the chat box. We'd love to see that. All right, so I am going to go ahead and stop sharing here, and I'm turning you over to Jill. Jill, you've got the controls there. Take it away. Thanks very much for being here.
All right, thank you. Let me just get set up.
Perfect, got your screen.
I think I've got everything going. Okay.
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here. This is a session that may be less focused on earth science specifically, despite the fact that I am technically a geologist and very excited to see one of my geologist friends, at least one so far. And it was really fun for me that when this notice got sent out, several old geologist friends reached out. So this has been really fun to reconnect with my geologist roots. But today, I will be talking about a vision of classroom assessment that's meaningful and worthwhile for teachers and students and can even be joyful. I hope to convince you of that. So I'll start off with a quote from a student, in part because much of my work is about refocusing instruction on students and ways that we can help them develop as science learners. And this means paying attention to what students think, which is actually a way assessments can become a force for good. So this is the kind of thing that students say when an assessment is meaningful and worthwhile to them. So during this assessment, I felt important and I really felt like I was actually planning to keep this country more safe. I enjoyed this. I found it fun and entertaining. Thank you. And I'll tell you, in my previous life in working in assessment, thank you was not something I ever got on an assessment I was working on. So when we start asking students to do things that are really complex, the results have higher validity measures. If students are actually trying, they show us a more accurate picture of what they know and can do. So this attitude toward an assessment isn't only important for engaging students and making them like school, it's also important for building high quality tasks. And teacher feedback is also an important indicator of the quality of an assessment. So when teachers say things like, I've never seen students more into a task in my class in my life, they asked to spend longer because they were invested, or sometimes I was really surprised which kids did well, it means they're seeing their students as science learners in a new way. So these are math and science co-teachers. These quotes are from who co-designed performance assessment together. They found that students who had never engaged at all in their science and math classes were not just engaged, but they were becoming leaders in their groups, which again contributed to validity, because these students' engagement meant that the teachers got evidence of their progress that revealed how they were actually growing as science learners. Whereas previously, these teachers had really dismissed them as disengaged. But after the task, they got insight into their strengths and their needs. And this helped them value what the students were doing and tap into kind of like how the students were growing. And this is an example of equitable and responsive instructional practice. Okay, so I've talked about how students and teachers respond to meaningful assessments. What do these mysterious assessments that are meaningful, engaging to students and drive equitable instructional practices look like? Well, to generate some ideas from all of you about qualities of assessments that can be, that you see as meaningful, I want you to compare two assessments that are roughly aligned to the same standard. So they have very different formats. One is aligned to a pre-NGSS standard, one is aligned to NGSS. I don't want to get too bogged down in the difference in format because there's really a lot of other things to talk about. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link to each of these assessments in the chat in a second. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to read them. And then I'm going to put you into breakouts with a Jamboard. And the Jamboard has some guiding questions. And I want you to just talk about some things that you see as differences between these two tasks. And before you dive into this, I just want to, I've done this work a lot. And so I know that particularly teachers can get really distracted by things that they want to fix in the assessment. And I want to assure you, this is an assessment that we use for professional learning because it has a lot of affordances and weaknesses. And so we use it in professional learning to highlight both. And then we work together to identify ways to improve it. And it's like sort of the part of the process. So don't get bogged down in, identifying what could be better about the assessment. We already know, and that's another activity. And so I know it can be hard for teachers to pass that by, but I want you to focus on the guiding questions in the Jamboard. I'm going to put all of these links in the chat right now, and then I recommend opening them before you jump into a breakout, which I'm going to create. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to do everything at once. And so can someone who has controls create some random breakouts for me? Maybe like 4 people per room. Or can I create that? Oh, I can do it.
You can, but I can do it.
I will do it. Okay. So let's see. All right, I'm just going to create some random rooms. And as you, so just do a quick scan, start talking. As you work, I will cluster your ideas. So I apologize, I'll be moving them around, but trying to find patterns across all your ideas. Okay. Any questions before we head out? It looks like there were some really rich conversations. Does anything really stand out? Anyone wants to share something that made them think?
Monica, is everybody back now? There we go. I think we're all back now, Jill.
Yeah.
Someone, okay. Well, it looks like there were some really rich conversations about that stemmed from comparing these tasks. I see some still filtering on. Please feel free to keep adding your reflections as they occur to you. And I noticed a lot of ideas about critical thinking and students making their own decisions, and you know, open-ended questions. And so I saw a lot of contrasts like that emerging. And these ideas really fit in a broader context of a fairly slow philosophical shift in assessment. So in 2013, the Gordon Commission, which was composed of really the international leaders in educational measurement, not specifically focused on science at all. And they came together in 2013, putting out this report, raising an alarm that assessments really aren't targeting the knowledge and skills that we actually care about. And this means both that we lack information about what students are, the competencies that we actually want to be able to support, as well as sending a really clear message to students and their parents and everyone else about what actually matters, what we really care about. And then in 2014, the National Research Council put out a report, this time specifically focused on science, stating that current assessments just won't work for supporting and monitoring the vision of science learning that forms the foundation of the NGSS, which at least standards based on the framework have been adopted in some form by about 40 states. And then again, in 2020, Jim Pellegrino reiterated what he said earlier in the NRC report, Knowing What Students Know, which is that there's really a need for assessments to be instructionally meaningful and grounded in theory. And if you are at all interested in the field of educational measurement, I highly recommend the report, Knowing What Students Know, which you can download for free from the National Academy's website. So SNAP was founded at Stanford as the Stanford NGSS Assessment Project, and we recently moved to WestEd, but initially we were, the project was initiated by Helen Quinn, who is the chair of the committee that wrote the NRC framework, the framework for K-12 science education, and Jonathan Osborne, who chaired the committee writing the science and engineering practices chapter of the framework, and Ray Pichon, who is an expert in designing systems of assessment that use performance assessment. And we were founded to explore the idea that a system of assessment not only could support the vision of science teaching and learning outlined in the framework, but also could include assessments that are worthwhile to students and teachers, that are motivating and cultivate students' identities as science learners. So over time, one of our goals has become refocusing how and why we assess students. So we often use the idea of student-centered assessment. And this is where the goal of the assessment is not to find out what students know and don't know, but what they think and where they are in their progression toward the ideas we're working on. So with this vision, the assessment is just the starting point. The goal is to gather information that helps us attend to and respond to what students actually need. And now, if you're thinking, I also actually have to grade students and I have 1,000 tests that I have to grade, these are very solvable problems, even with this approach to assessment, but not within the time frame that we have today. So it's something we can talk about later. Okay, so how can we find our way to this mythical new version of assessment? Well, we can never find our way to get there unless we have a clear destination. So agreeing on this destination for SNAP meant establishing a set of design, really a purpose, agreeing on a purpose. And for us, that's to use assessments to support instruction in ways that advance this new vision of science teaching and learning. We needed to create a set of design principles that would guide the development of assessments that would meet this purpose. So our goal was, or the set of design guiding principles that we create, I'm going to share just a few of them, there are more. So the first is to measure the intent of the standard. And that means often when assessments are written, we're assessing the easiest thing to assess. In our case, we wanted to have as a design goal to decide what really mattered for students learning, what we really needed to know more about, and to do whatever we could to assess that. We wanted our assessments to be asset-based, which means, again, we don't want to do this dichotomous, what do students know and don't know, but elicit where they are and gather evidence of how we can support their continued growth. We wanted assessments to be focused on students figuring something out about real, meaningful questions or problems, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. We wanted the assessments to actively build student agency engagement. And so this means that the act of taking the assessment, students would recognize how they can use their knowledge and skills to address real and meaningful questions and to take on some of the intellectual responsibility required to address real questions and problems in a way that we often don't give them an opportunity to do in school. We wanted to design for a wide range of entry points. We wanted to create really complex, rich tasks, but that students at any point in their development toward proficiency could still engage with the task. They wouldn't have to just turn it over and say, I don't even know where to start. So we use a set of design criteria to operationalize these principles. And each criteria here has a number of, or I should say each category here has a number of criteria under it. And so I won't explore each one, and I won't even explore, I'll just explore a few of these categories and really just one criterion under each one, just to give you a taste of how we use this principled design process to really draw a direct line from these like kind of technical design stages to the kinds of assessments that elicit responses that I started with. So that elicit students saying this is really meaningful and worthwhile activity to me. So all of these design steps, everything in our development process is oriented toward producing an assessment that is going to get students to say this mattered and I feel like I'm growing as a science learner, and that teachers say this is something meaningful and worthwhile and helps me support my students. So I'll start with just this category, target skills and knowledge that matter. So one of the criteria under this category is uses dimensions together to make sense of phenomena. And so this means that we want students to use their knowledge and skills together to answer a question that they didn't already know the answer to before the assessment. So they figure it out during the task. And this means that we have to give them lots of like data and other things to work with that enable them to do that figuring out. And so this is an example. This is a question from TIMSS, which is an international standardized test. This is a grade 4 question. And this item looks at the surface, like students might really be making sense of a real phenomenon. With magnets, even it may not be very meaningful. So in this task, Betty has 2 magnets. She's doing this experiment with magnets and pins to see, how the magnets attract the pins. Stephen says that both magnets are equally strong. Do you agree? Explain. So again, at the surface, this might look like it's really engaging students in making sense of real phenomena, but students are really just telling us whether or not they know there's a relationship between strength and distance for magnets. And we learned very little about the boundaries around what the student does and doesn't understand about magnetism. So placing this same knowledge in the context of a real problem and asking students to use the practices of science and engineering we can get a much deeper sense of the student's understanding and how it's growing and where it needs more attention. So in this example, students learn about the problem of oil spills, and they learn about an experiment in a lab using magnets to remove oil from water, like basically just a little basin. And so the students during this task have to consider how the experiment could be adapted to be used to remove oil from the ocean. So they use the engineering practice of designing a solution together with their knowledge of magnets to consider how magnets could work at a distance to remove oil from the ocean. And so it's the integration of the science practices, disciplinary core ideas, and cross-cutting concepts that together help us elicit rich information about students' thinking. And for those NGSS fans in the audience, the highlighting's for you. Another category of criteria that we use is about emphasizing equity and asset-based perspectives. And the criterion under this category that I want to focus on is about allowing students to use reasoning that brings their own lens and perspective. This is really important because when we engage students in making sense of like real world phenomena, they bring their whole lives of different experiences and different ideas about these phenomena. And so we want to leave room for them to bring those assets to the task and use them as part of their sense making. So for example, we have a task where we present a real problem around a deer population decreasing and some data showing that this is happening. Students are presented with a whole bunch of different kinds of relevant data to this problem. And by the end of the task, after they have sort of examined each of the data sources, they have to come up with a claim supported with evidence and reasoning about why they think the deer population is decreasing. One test that we use to ensure we're meeting this criterion is that we want to make sure that a student can meet our highest level of response or excelling with very divergent responses. So students can respond to this task in all different ways and still meet the criteria that we are trying to elicit. Then that is showing us that students can kind of enter into this task and engage with it in very different ways. And so we kind of line up all of our highest level responses and we examine them to see sort of what is the sort of degree of variation that students are bringing to the task. And we iteratively refine the tasks until we see the kind of variation we want. It's also really important to look at the other levels. So we want to look at earlier levels of proficiency to make sure that there's still instructionally useful information that these responses are able to provide. So for example, this student who's providing a response at the developing level is showing that they are examining the data and they're starting to explain the patterns they see. And this is a really important entry point for the teacher to bring attention to ways that this student can strengthen their evidence-based reasoning. But it's really important to be able to show they aren't doing nothing. They're already making important progress that they can, that's sort of a really productive starting place for the teacher to engage them. And so this is a task where students, even though it's really complex, students who are working on these competencies at the developing level can still do something. They don't just return blank assessments, and they are providing useful information for instruction. The last category that I just wanted to highlight for you is incorporating student choice and decision-making. So this is really critical for motivation and for getting deep engagement. One of the types of performance tasks that we create really prioritizes this criteria. So one of the types that we create can range from like 3 days to as many as 10 days, and they fully integrate instruction and assessment. So they're really seamless for from the student's perspective, but they're distinct from the teacher's perspective. Not all assessments can attend to these criteria to the same degree, but we do try to attend to them to the extent possible. So in this task, students use what they know about sound waves to collect data from a wave generator and model how noise canceling technology works. And then they identify a problem with noise pollution in their community, and they propose a process to dampen or cancel the noise using what they know about sound waves and the modeling that they have been doing during the task to construct models and explain how the models support their solution. So in this assessment, students really shape the task around problems that they actually want to solve. So, for example, one student shared with their classmates that they were really struggling with noise. He was really struggling with noise in his home as his family watched TV, and he just was having trouble doing homework because it was just too loud. And so his group was really excited to try to tackle this problem for him immediately using these ideas they've been working on for the last couple of days and applying them to construct a solution. In this format of performance assessment, where there's some group work component, there's always, it sort of culminates in an individual product that students create that builds off of all the work they've been doing with their groups, where they create some outward facing product toward a stakeholder. One of the criteria is basically that the stakeholder needs to be outside of the bounds of the school. So it really promotes them communicating their findings in some sort of consequential way. So to give you a sense of how students responded to this very student-driven task, this is a response written, I think, just last week when we were piloting this assessment in a classroom. So a student wrote on the back of a 5-day-long assessment, "Thank you so much for all you've done for us this year. Your class has made me find a love of science and life I never thought I'd have. Science is no longer just a boring subject at school. It's so interesting." So obviously, things the teacher has done all year have led up to this point. But this student did decide to write this at the end of, as I said, a 5-day-long performance assessment. And so this is a nice reminder or feedback for us that the student, that this contributed potentially to the student feeling this way about the science class. Okay, so it gives you a little taste of some of the key elements of student-centered science performance assessments. I frequently get asked where people can find examples that they can use. So on our website, you can find lots of performance assessments for K through 12, including different forms of performance assessments, like I've mentioned. There are also tools and resources for creating your own. And I will give you links to all of these things at the end. I have a resource sheet to share with all of these slides and lots of resources that you might find useful. The assessments that we share on our website are mostly used, at least by us, as learning tools in the professional learning that we do with educators to help them. They basically deconstruct all of our assessments, analyze student work, analyze rubrics, et cetera, toward creating their own assessments, because the goal is to really create performance assessments that are deeply contextualized in your own, with your own students and your own instruction. Right now, everything is available on our website at Stanford. I did just hear from Stanford that they're planning to take our site down in June. Hopefully the SNAP work will get put back up. We are trying to move it over to WestEd. If anyone here uses our free project-based curriculum, that will most likely come down. So please download what you need now, or let me know if you want direct links. I will also mention our design tools and processes are very involved. So we created a set of free hybrid online courses to help people use them. So this really guides you step by step through using our design tools. We have a course that begins with just like basic assessment literacy for science performance assessment. For people who get really excited about performance assessment, you can move on to like really step-by-step support of developing performance assessments. And then piloting and using the student work to strengthen the assessment is basically doing a modified validity analysis. I do want to point out that assessment is a verb and not a noun. And so what is really important is the last course, which focuses on ways to use performance assessments that truly center students in your classroom. And so basically you take all the assessment that you developed and embed it into your instruction for this like fully responsive instructional practice. Course 1 does some of that as well, but the last one helps you do it with your own assessment. The courses have instructional videos where we provide some theory and guided practice, etc. But a lot of the work is done in teams with your colleagues. We give you development tools and all kinds of other resources that guide all of that. You do the work with your colleagues, not with us. And that's how we sort of enable it to be free. Because I know many of you were really responded to the quote that I used as the title of the session, I want to also take a few minutes to show you some of the assessments that have come out of that course series that educators have developed that I think really show you some examples of how assessments can be joyful and how educators have developed those assessments. So one task that a group of high school teachers developed together with us, we guided them through the course series. They had students wrestle with this real problem in their own community, which is there's a salt marsh that there's proposals for developing. They gave students all kinds of data. The students got to choose which data they really dug into. The students created models using the data, and then they created this outward-facing communication to actual stakeholders about what they found from analyzing the data and what they would advise for relative to the 4 different potential development plans, one of them being not developing at all, but making a sort of a nature preserve. Another group of teachers developed a task where students examine their own diet. This is a chemistry task where they do use quantitative reasoning to propose a change in their diet and how they think that would affect the environment. And so they really tried to bring quantitative reasoning into this like very meaningful task that their students got very, very involved with. The task that led to the quote, that's the title of this session, was a really fun second grade task created by a group of educators. This is an instructionally embedded task that comes at the end of the unit that they were also developing, where students create this is a unit on force and motion. Students create a mobile. And this mobile they create with items from their life. This is at the beginning of the year, and they want students to really show something about themselves to the rest of their classmates using this mobile and this like metaphor of balance. And they sort of record a table of kind of how they balanced or how they were not able to balance their mobile using these ideas of balance and unbalanced forces. And then they put all the mobiles together in their whole classroom and did a balancing activity, and they really played out the metaphor and all of the kind of personal or the personality that each of the students brought to their own mobile, and kind of pulling together the classroom culture around that. Another elementary classroom that got really into their performance assessment and had trouble ending it ever was a bilingual kindergarten where a teacher created an assessment around the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, where students kind of dug into that problem, and then they looked at their lunchbox every day and they graphed the disposable plastics and also through school lunch, wherever they got their lunch, they graphed the amount of plastics that they brought. And then they used their own, kindergarten level quantitative reasoning to think about how they could impact this problem or reduce their impact on the environment. And their individual product at the end was, because they really never wanted to finish it, and the whole school got into it, the cafeteria, everyone. So ultimately they wrote a letter to another bilingual kindergarten explaining what they had done and why they think that class should be the next to pick up this task. So we do if you are interested in using these courses to develop your own joyful assessments, they are free and available for you to use to facilitate yourself. We do offer different levels of facilitation if you want some support, and you can contact me if that's something that you're interested in. But I would like to leave as much time as possible to hear what your questions are and thoughts are and responses. And I want to open up the floor to you. I will, and I'll actually leave up my last slide while we go to that.
Jill, that was absolutely fabulous. We have a few questions that we garnered from the chat box, and so we'll start out with those. So initially, maybe you can add it to the slide or put it in the chat. Wanda would like to know if you have a hashtag for this presentation, or are you on Twitter? So it seems like we have some people that would like to now start following you.
I know Wanda from Twitter. I love the way that you share everything that you learn, and I learned so much from you. So I'm really excited to see you here. And thank you for that question. And thank you for all you do for the science education community. There early on, someone created the hashtag ourSNAP, but I haven't used that in a long time. But our Twitter handle is, let me just put it in here. I should be way better about this. I'm terrible about using hashtags. If anyone has any ideas, please enter them.
GSE. Okay, so we have a couple more questions. One from Stacy. Jill, can you please expand upon the equity in allowing students to use, make my screen clear. Hold on. Use reasoning versus diversity and asset-based perspectives. So can you expand upon equity in allowing students to use reasoning versus diversity and asset-based perspectives?
Oh goodness. Well, so many, those both have so many dimensions to them. So the like asset-based perspectives is like, so one of the ways that guides the design is that we basically, we want to create assessments that are sensitive to the full range of proficiency. And so the perspective that we're taking there is that all students have something that they're working on, and we want to value that. And so we're trying to elicit wherever they are. And so then this comes up a lot in the rubrics, where we want to define in the rubrics how we want to support students' growth. So we don't want to just say like the students knew this and they didn't know that, or they were able to do this and they weren't able to do that. In the using the asset-based perspective, this pushes us to design rubrics that take what the students are showing about what they know and can do and articulate what those next levels look like, so the teacher can also take this asset-based perspective and see it not as the like, all right, well, this is what my kids got, but now my job is to see where they are and support them in moving to that next level of proficiency. And so the asset-based perspective is sort of like, it's very involved in this assessment as a verb and not a noun, but all of the elements of the design, from the performances that we're measuring to the tasks to the rubrics, have to be advocating for this like growth-oriented version of assessment. In terms of equity, there's so many different ways that equity feeds into the design that's not just asset-based. So, you know, it's sort of hard for me to know where to start there. But, you know, one area that, you know, everyone points to, of course, is with the phenomenon providing access to all students if we give them a really complex task with a real world context that that we want to give students multimodal ways of engaging with it, so that students who may not be familiar, or students have language learners, et cetera, that we have both many different ways for them to enter into the task and to be able to understand what this phenomenon is that they're working on, and many different ways for them to show us what they know and can do. So we want to elicit evidence of where they are using different modes of their both like their responses, as well as how we're communicating what we're looking for.
Okay. All right. So Stacy just had a quick follow-up with that. How does equity come into place in the asset-based example? Do we use individual rubrics?
So we have a bunch of different ways that we approach rubrics. So in the our initial work through SNAP, we use analytic rubrics, which is sort of an approach that Scale more broadly uses in all of our work. When it comes to three-dimensional assessment, those can get really complex. And so we're actually developed a whole new approach to three-dimensional rubrics that are both really trying to advance this asset-based approach and support students' growth, as well as tie into some of the work that a lot of schools are doing with student-led conferencing and digital portfolios, et cetera. And so we have sort of a new approach to rubrics that we think actually does that even better. So yes, the rubrics are a big part of it, but exactly how is something that is evolving.
Okay. Terrific. We have a number of other questions. Angie and Greg both have questions, and we're running up against a little bit of a time crunch. So I'm going to suggest that Angie and Greg, why don't you stay back for a couple seconds if Jill doesn't mind hanging on for a little bit once we wrap up the webinar for today. But we do have one question regarding your online courses. Do the online courses give guidelines for grading assessments and making assessments that are gradable?
Yes, in the last course. Sorry, you have to get through the whole set. But yeah, the last course we take on grading and how to blend this student-centered, growth-oriented approach to assessment and grading. There's really a lot more to do there than we do in that course, but that is something that that is. Yes, there's a lot of work to be done there, but we do get it started in that fourth course.
Terrific, terrific. So the balance of the people, if you still have questions, so that was Greg and Artis and Stacy, please feel free to stay back and ask away. And so we're going to pass it back to Aida and to wrap us up for today. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Jill, for a wonderful presentation. So as Missy said, we have a couple other questions. We're going to share those questions with Jill, and we'll post those questions and any responses she provides up on the webinar page, and you'll be getting an email from us when those are posted, as well as the archive and the slides. So keep your eyes open for that email. As a reminder, as we close up here, this is going to be, I know it's only the end of April, right? But we're going to take our summer break. We'll be back with you for the 8th season of the NGSS ESS webinars starting in September. So please watch in August your inbox there for that announcement. And then over the summer, check out the AGI YouTube channel for the NGSS ESS playlist. It'll be up there. Monica, if you could drop that post-webinar survey link into the chat box, I would really appreciate that. Thank you so much. It's really important to us that you do complete those surveys. It helps us understand what we can do to support you and your work more completely. So please do complete that. We very much appreciate it. And many of you know, but for those of you that are new to this program, this series is brought to you by 3 organizations: NAGT, the National Association of Geoscience Teachers, where we have a webinar series as one of our member benefits, and webinars at least once a week. So please do join us at NAGT. Also, Nesta, Missy, you want to talk about Nesta quick?
Sure. So NESTA, National Earth Science Teachers Association, is your K-12 focused Earth and Space Science Education Association, and we welcome you. We have monthly e-news, a quarterly journal, a peer-reviewed journal called The Earth Scientist, and we're present at a number of events, and so we're out there, and we'd love for you to be out there with us. Thank you.
And the American Geosciences Institute, Ed.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks very much for joining us today. AGI is a federation of professional societies that also include NESTA and NAGT. We have many different resources for educators, so please take a look at the website. In particular, we facilitate Earth Science Week each October, and getting onto the Earth Science Week listserv is a great way to keep informed about what is available to Earth Science educators throughout the geoscience education community. Thanks very much for being here. And thank you, Jill, very much.
Super big thank you to Jill. If you can find that reactions button down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you might want to just do a little confetti there or a clap. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Jill, thank you so much for a wonderful, engaging presentation this afternoon. Appreciate it. And Monica, thanks for stepping in on the back end for us. Hope you all have a great afternoon. If you'd like to stay back for a couple of minutes, I think, Jill, you said you could give us a couple more minutes of time. That would be awesome. Otherwise, if you need to go off, please feel free to do so. Have a great afternoon. Thank you very much.